Labour is facing a major backlash after voting through a controversial new bill that critics say could ban banter in Britain's pubs. The employment rights bill, designed to strengthen workers' rights, includes Clause 18, a small but explosive addition that could force bar staff to police jokes and casual conversation. The Free Speech Union branded it as Snowflake's charter, and even the Equality and Human Rights Commission admits it could disproportionately curtail free speech. So, could we soon see banter? This is called banter bouncers, that's what I call it. Careful, if you tell a joke, you could end up like Keir Starmer.
That man is not allowed in my pub. Get out of my pub. Go on. Calm yourself down. Get out of my pub.
That was a terrible joke that he told. So, we are delighted to be joined by the editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Hello, Tom. Welcome. Thank you, Tom. So, Tom, people have been talking about this bill for quite a while now, but it's actually this week in Parliament it went through the next step, right?
Absolutely. So it's still got to go to the House of Lords, so there's still hope that something can be done to remove this particular clause, because it just seems to be sort of waging war on just pub culture, pub life. People go to places like the pub, they go to nightclubs to let loose a little bit. They shouldn't expect to have their words policed or for little signs to be erected on the door saying what topics they should steer against. And that is exactly what this particular clause would be doing. I mean, it's a bit of a kind of convoluted way to that point, but it's the fact they're essentially requiring employers to protect their staff against harassment from the third parties, which on the face of it doesn't sound controversial. When no one here, I hope, goes to the pub with the intention of harassing the staff. But
John over there.
I have heard about it. So, John aside, that shouldn't really be an issue. But, of course, the issue is harassment is a crime that involves speech, and employers tend to be very overly cautious when it comes to drawing up policies on these kinds of things. So you can easily see why a publican or anyone else would want to be particularly harsh on these kinds of things so that they were never potentially going to be faced with a lawsuit. So it's a real threat to just our ability to speak our minds, even in the most kind of informal but public of settings, I guess. Yeah,
I mean, as you say, the thing about these bills is they're put through with the best of intentions. But it always amazes me how no one ever actually looks at, oh, how could this work out? And we saw it with all of these different movements, including gender ideology and self-ID. They go, oh, yeah, what's wrong with it? And then some people need to come along and say, well, this is what's wrong with it. But then, by then, the kind of governments move so far down the process, it feels like they just do it to save face in a way.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's actually some people who suggest that the reason this has made it into this bill is just because it's been put there maybe by a kind of civil servant. This is a particular clause which has come up in previous pieces of legislation but removed because of these concerns raised about freedom of speech and so on. So one would have hoped that once it was pointed out to the Labour Party, they would remove it. Of course, this is a potentially unworkable and really a liberal thing to put on the statute book, but they've had it pointed out to them now. They have ploughed ahead with this legislation. They did vote down the amendment that the Tories tried to bring this week, which would remove this particular clause. So they can't say they weren't warned, but it's something which I can't think of any sane person who would support the idea that you would have banter bouncers in place. But the unintended consequences, as you suggested, this kind of legislation, which there's something about the Labour Party in particular, have got it in their heads that you have to hyper-regulate even the most minute of interactions between people, that you can't just leave it up to people to figure out disagreements and things for themselves. But the upshot of it is going to be, a real blow to what is genuinely quite an important part of British public life.
Yeah, because, I mean, we've already seen this kind of stuff before in terms of we've seen, like, comedians at gigs, you have to sign a piece of paper that says you're not going to talk about anything contentious or that could be perceived as being, offensive to somebody. And I believe also a couple of years ago at the Edinburgh Fringe, you had Jerry Sadowitz, one of the kind of originators of alternative comedy, had his show cancelled from the Pleasance Theatre because a bunch of 18-year-old students who were working at the venue went, oh, no, we're offended by, I believe it was a sight of his willy.
He does. That is part of that.
That would do. But the fact that we've already seen this kind of stuff going on already, and there's no law that backs up, to add a law to it could then make it sort of so much worse.
Absolutely, so much worse, so much more widespread, and just kind of formalises what has already been creeping in, as you suggest, because this particular legislation referring to third parties, obviously that's customers, but that could also be performers, people who are invited into a venue or to the room above a pub or into a comedy club or what have you. It's also going to affect them. There's also concerns it's going to affect universities even more so because of the fact that there's invited speakers who come in. I mean, there again you see already loads of censorship, loads of no platforming. This just is another kind of legal nudge in that direction, something that we really don't need. I think the other thing that it's sort of formalising is something that's been creeping in for a while, which is this idea that there is a kind of worker's right not to be offended, which we've seen blow up in things like the Jerry Sadowitz case, or things like when Terry Gilliam was hounded out of a particular theatre because of his comments on the gender issue and so on, which is it's a really negative thing. And we've seen that play out in terms of workplace relations between different employees, you know, these kinds of policies being used to squash someone who has heretical views, according to them. But the fact that it's now even being turned on customers is an even more insidious thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think on social media last week I saw a gay gentleman in Belfast, and I don't know if you saw that clip, and he went, and I think he got kicked out of a gay bar because they had seen some comments he'd made on social media about women's sports or there being two sexes. So to give the power to the only kind of worthy people are allowed of being socialised or being seen in public. Again, it's sort of almost like cancellation on this micro scale.
No, absolutely. And we all know where most of this censorship is going to go, what direction that's going to go in. There are people of a particular political persuasion, people who tend to be more woke or kind of a liberal left, if you like. They're going to be the people who are going to want to weaponise this kind of legislation. They're going to be the people who are going to want to terrify their bosses into clamping down on speech they dislike. And on that point of how this is going to add to what's already taking place. I mean, you talk about something like the gender-critical issue, the difficulty that gender-critical campaigners have with booking venues, with even just having meetings informally in a pub or lesbian dating nights that are genuinely for lesbians only. The difficulty that people are having holding those things at the moment, even without this legislation, indicates that it's going to get so much worse if this isn't eventually taken out.
So do you know what the next steps are with this bill? It's going to go to laws. Is there anything that the people out there do? I saw something on the Free Speech Union website. I think there was like a template you could send to your MP just to kind of raise more awareness. Is that really the only thing that we can do now?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's gone through the common stages now, so it's not as if your MP will be kind of directly able to intervene at this particular point. But the more noise that can be made out of this, the more pressure that the government could be put on in general to potentially take this out is all for the good as it carries on, because I think once it's really made abundantly clear what this entails, I think any sensible person, even within this Labour government, there must be a few of them, will relent eventually.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sort of inspires me to kind of make some friends so that I can then have an excuse to go out to the pub and then...
It's an important step.
And then try to see if I could sort of, to test this law as and when. I mean, I guess we're going to... I mean, on the positive side, when we do have people cancelled in pubs, cancelled out socialising, I guess what's going to happen is that I will get a lot more guests for this show.
It's win-win. So you've got to be a one-man kind of cancellation machine, you know.
Yeah, no.
Getting your friends thrown out of pubs so that they can relitigate that on the airwaves here.
All right, we'll have to see. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Please, Tom Slater, editor of Spike Online.